The last thing Marcus said before he walked into that tree line was my name.
Just called it back over his shoulder. Casual and easy.
The way you talk to a friend you've worked beside for 6 years.
I just said yeah. Went back to the equipment check and didn't even look up.
I had no idea that was the last time I'd ever hear his real voice. What came out of those trees 20 minutes later? It sounded almost like him, but it was like a word spoken by something that had only ever heard the language. I knew instantly it wasn't him, but I gotta go back to the beginning, or none of this makes sense. I'm Cal Briggs.
I spent 14 years as a search and rescue team leader out here on the Olympic Peninsula.
After the Navy, pulling lost hikers out of terrain that didn't want to give them back was the only thing that made sense. This park is nearly 1 million acres of the most complex wilderness in the country. Right in the middle is the Hoh Rainforest. It gets 14 feet of rain a year and grows things that have no business being that big. You won't find the sun in there, and you definitely won't find silence.
Marcuside was my second on most operations.
6 years, my partner. He had a dry sense of humor and was the most technically sound operator I've ever worked with. He wasn't someone who got lost. He wasn't someone who panicked. He definitely wasn't someone who just walked into a tree line and didn't come back. Until he was. The call-out came in on a Thursday in late October. Solo hiker, male, 30s, reported overdue by 48 hours. We'd just taken 4 inches of rain, so it was an active search right away. Marcus and I went in as the advance team. The plan was simple. Run the primary corridor, check the marked campsites, and radio back before nightfall. We had no idea what we were walking into. If you've never been inside the Hoh, it's hard to really get it. Other forests have gaps where the light comes through. Here, the canopy just closes over you like a fist. Everything grows on top of everything else. Moss 6 inches thick, ferns up to your shoulders. On an overcast day, the light is just this sourceless green. It's a darkness you can actually feel on your skin. And then there's the sound. The rainforest is never quiet. There's always water dripping, birds calling, the whole place shifting under its own weight. You learn pretty quick to tell the difference between random noise and something moving. About 2 hours in, something changed. Marcus noticed it first. He just stopped right in front of me without signaling, which wasn't like him. He was standing there with his head tilted, just listening. I almost walked right into his back. I stopped too, and I listened. It took a second to register what was wrong. The birds had completely stopped. Now, a hawk flies over. Things go quiet for a minute. That's normal. But this wasn't localized. It was a straight line of dead silence running right along our path. Like something was moving ahead of us, and the forest was tracking it. We just looked at each other. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I gave him a shrug. We didn't say a word. We just kept moving. We hit the third campsite a little while later. Found the missing guy's setup. Tent was still standing. Food bag was hung up properly on the bear wire. Everything looked totally normal, except he wasn't there. Inside the tent's vestibule, there was a journal sitting on a camp stool. It had been left open to the rain. Most of the ink was totally washed out, just blue streaks down the page, but I could still make out one line near the bottom. I snapped a photo of it for the file. Later on, when I enhanced the image, I could read what he wrote. It said, "It keeps using the same word, and I think the word is my name." I never put that in the official report. I didn't tell the family about that last line. I definitely didn't put it in my official report. But I'm telling you now, because that guy was trying to document something real. If you've ever spent time in the old growth out here, you know that specific kind of green silence. You've felt the attention of a place that's just too alive to ignore you.
The Hoh isn't the only place that keeps records of the people who pass through it. We set up our camp at Site 3, right next to the missing guy's tent.
Standard protocol is to hold position and wait for first light. The rain finally eased up into this thick mist that just hung in the canopy. Somewhere out in the dark, the river was moving fast and loud. By 9 o'clock, we were settled in by the fire.
Just two guys waiting out the night in the middle of nowhere. Marcus stood up and said he was going to go check the bear wire on our food bag.
It was hung maybe 30 meters up the trail.
A 2-minute job he'd done 1,000 times before.
He pulled his headlamp on and started walking up the path.
I just sat there by the fire, tracking his light through the trees.
Everything felt completely normal.
I watched that beam of light sweep across the ferns until he went around a bend. And then he was gone.
The forest just swallowed him up, and I was left waiting.
I checked my watch.
5 minutes went by, which was fine. Maybe he was checking the other wire, too. Then, 7 minutes. At 9 minutes, I stood up. I reached for my radio, and right then, I heard him. He called my name, but it didn't come from the trail. It came from the deep brush, out toward the river. It sounded just like him. I said yeah, and waited. Nothing but silence. I turned my headlamp toward that wall of wet ferns, and I couldn't see a damn thing. My name again. Same voice, same tone. But this time, I heard something underneath it. Like the voice was assembled rather than spoken. Like something had collected the sounds, arranging them without understanding why the order mattered. I didn't answer this time. I turned my headlamp off instead. I stood in the dark of the Hoh Rainforest, in the rain, completely still. And I waited. And in the dark, I heard it moving. Not on the trail.
In the undergrowth, parallel to the camp boundary.
It was moving slowly, making almost no sound. That was the most terrifying part. The undergrowth should have been loud, crackling under any weight. Instead, just the softest displacement of wet fern. It circled the camp. I tracked it by sound for what my watch later confirmed was 7 minutes. It circled the entire perimeter at a consistent distance. Never coming closer. Never retreating. Just moving in a slow, deliberate orbit, like it was taking inventory, like it was determining something. And then it stopped. And from the northern edge of the perimeter, from the darkest part of the tree line where the old growth closed in, it spoke again. Not my name this time. Marcus's name. In my voice. I understood then it had been listening to me for 3 days. It collected enough of my voice that it no longer needed Marcus's. It had upgraded. I sat down in the wet, put my head in my hands, and focused on breathing. I radioed for extractions. I told dispatch I lost visual on my partner and needed backup. I didn't mention the voice or the circling. I sat with my back to the largest tree I could find and waited for dawn. I built up the fire as high as I could get it. Then I found the widest tree trunk in the camp and put my back right up against it. I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just sat there in the mud, holding my radio in one hand and my knife in the other, just waiting for dawn to break. Every hour felt like a lifetime. The rain just kept coming down, hissing against the fire. I kept my headlamp off the whole time, just listening to the dark. Eventually, the pitch black started turning into this pale, sickly gray. Morning was finally breaking through the canopy. But the woods didn't feel any safer in the light. At 6:47 in the morning, Marcus just walked right out of the trail. He came from the exact direction of the bear wire, like he just finished checking it.
But he looked terrible. He was soaking wet and completely disoriented. He told me he sat down by a tree for a second, closed his eyes, and suddenly it was morning. He had absolutely no memory of the last 9 hours.
To him, no time had passed at all.
The backup team was only 11 minutes away, but I was staring at a stranger.
I looked at his gear. His heavy-duty headlamp was completely dead. The battery was fully drained, which shouldn't have been possible in that amount of time.
Then I saw his right hand. Right between the knuckles, there were 4 parallel marks. They weren't cuts.
Chilling realization. They were deep impressions, like fingers had been pressing into him all night.
I'd never told him what I heard out there.
I told myself I was protecting him.
But honestly, I was just terrified of what he might remember if I did.
3 weeks later, we found his boot.
Just one boot, wedged deep in a root mass on the east bank of the river. No foot inside. No other trace of him ever turned up. The official record called it a drowning.
The river was running high and fast, so it made sense to everyone else. It was a clean, rational explanation for a grieving family.
But I knew the river didn't take him.
I wrote the report exactly the way I was supposed to.
I had left out the voice in the trees. I left out the missing 9 hours and the marks on Marcus's hand. I just signed my name and closed the file.
After that, I drove home to Port Angeles.
The whole drive, I just listened to the hum of the tires on the wet road. Pulling into my driveway, everything looked so normal. But normal didn't feel safe anymore. I sat in my truck for a long time before I went inside,
Just staring through the glass.
trying to convince myself that I was back in the real world. Trying to wash that green dark out of my head.
8 months later, I walked away from search and rescue. I told the team it was just time.
Told them I'd given everything I had to give. And that wasn't exactly a lie. The truth is, I couldn't go back into the Hoh. Every time the wind moved through the trees, I'd freeze. I kept listening for that voice underneath the natural sounds.
If you can't trust your own ears out there, you're going to get someone killed.
Marcus is still running ops out of Port Angeles. We still grab dinner once a month with our wives.
He's exactly the same guy he always was.
Steady, dry sense of humor, completely unfazed.
I'm glad he doesn't remember what happened.
But sometimes, when he talks at a certain pitch, I hear something underneath his voice that just isn't right. I know it's just my brain playing tricks on me. I know that.
But I haven't eaten in a restaurant with my back to the room since that October.
I always need to see the door. And I threw my headlamp in the trash. Because I can't stop thinking about what that thing collected in the dark.
I don't own a headlamp anymore.
I threw my last one in a box in the garage and I haven't touched it since.
Just looking at it makes my chest tight. Because I can't look at that black glass without thinking about the battery.
A heavy-duty rig like that is built to run for days on a single charge.
It shouldn't have died.
9 hours of darkness costs a certain amount of power.
Something pulled every ounce of juice from Marcus's light while he was gone. Just drained it dry.
You gotta ask yourself what might need that much time and that specific kind of darkness to do whatever it needed to do.
What takes 9 hours in the pitch black?
I stand at my window sometimes and just stare at the tree line.
We build these houses and pave these driveways and pretend we're safe. But the woods are right there. I think about what it might have collected in all of that dark. It had Marcus for 9 hours.
It had his voice, his memories, his mannerisms. The Hoh isn't just a forest, it's a sponge.
It absorbs everything that walks into it. Every sound, Every footstep, every word spoken. I can't stop wondering what it's still doing with what it learned.
If it upgraded from Marcus's voice to mine in just 3 days, what's it capable of now? There are people out there right now hiking those trails.
Setting up their tents, thinking they're alone in the quiet.
But they aren't alone.
The forest is always listening.
And once it learns your name, it doesn't forget.
We found his boot 3 weeks later.
Just one boot, caught in a root mass on the eastern bank of the river.
Now, don't put any foot in it.
No other remains.
The river explanation satisfied the official record. I wrote it up exactly the way I was supposed to.
I checked the boxes and filed the paperwork.
Then I drove home to Port Angeles, and I sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. I left SAR 8 months after that. I told the team it was time, that I'd given what I had to give. That wasn't entirely untrue. What was also true was that I couldn't go into the Hoh anymore without hearing things.
At the edge of every natural sound, I'd hear the suggestion of a voice beneath it.
And an operator who can't trust his senses is a liability. Marcus still runs operations out of Port Angeles. He's exactly who he always was. Dry humor. Technically sound. Steady. If he has any residue from that night, it doesn't show.
We still have dinner once a month with our wives.
I'm glad he's okay. I really am. But I haven't eaten in a restaurant with my back to the room since October of 2019.
I don't tell him that sometimes when he speaks, I hear something underneath it.
Just in certain registers at certain volumes.
Something that isn't quite right.
I know it's not real. I know the mind makes patterns. A traumatic night in a rainforest is enough to tune your hearing to a frequency that doesn't exist.
I know all of that.
And I don't own a headlamp anymore, because I can't look at one without thinking about the battery, about how 9 hours of darkness costs a certain amount of power, about what might need that much time and that specific kind of darkness to do whatever it needed to do, and what it might still be doing with what it learned.
I don't sleep much anymore.
I just stand here, looking out at the tree line, wondering what's looking back. People think the woods are just trees and dirt. They don't realize it's a living, breathing thing.
I keep thinking about that battery.
9 hours of darkness costs a certain amount of power. Whatever was out there needed that specific kind of dark to do what it did.
And it took it right from us.
I try not to think about what it collected in all that dark. It had 3 days to listen to me, to learn how I sound. Now it has Marcus's voice, too. It's just building a library out there. I still look at the maps sometimes, tracing the routes, looking for something I missed. But paper doesn't show you the canopy. It doesn't show you how the air feels when the birds stop singing. That hiker's journal is probably still out there, rotting in the mud. His family thinks he drowned. The official record says he drowned. But I know what he wrote. I know what he heard. Marcus is still out there running operations. He's a good man, the best I ever worked with. But he trusts the woods. He doesn't remember what happened, so he doesn't know he shouldn't trust them anymore. Sometimes I wonder if it's watching him right now, if it's following his team, just out of sight in the ferns. Learning new words, perfecting the pitch of his voice. I made it out of the Hoh, physically anyway, but part of me is still sitting against that tree in the pitch black, holding a radio that no one is going to answer. The river washes away a lot of sins. It's loud enough to cover up the sounds you aren't supposed to hear. It gives the official reports a nice, neat conclusion. Drowned. Case closed.
But the forest knows the truth.
It's out there, right now, dripping, shifting, and waiting.
And whatever it's doing with what it learned,
It's not finished yet.
I know it's not real. I know the mind makes patterns.
A traumatic night is enough to tune your hearing to a frequency that isn't there.
But I haven't eaten in a restaurant with my back to the room since October of 2019.
You tell yourself you left it behind, that you're safe, Neff.
But every sudden noise, every voice that pitches just a little too high, it pulls you right back into the dark. I got rid of a lot of gear when I left SAR. Most of it I didn't need anymore. But I don't own a headlamp anymore for a different reason.
I just can't have one in the house.
'Cause I can't look at one without thinking about the battery.
About how 9 hours of absolute darkness costs a certain amount of power.
Batteries don't just drain like that.
Something has to pull the charge.
And you start wondering what might need that much time. Or what needs that specific kind of darkness to do whatever it needed to do.
It wasn't just waiting us out.
It was working.
Say in a natural American voice, remembering with a shudder. It circled that camp for hours,
Just listening in the dark. Testing the boundaries of what we were. Figuring out exactly how we sounded, how we breathed.
I sat against that tree and I thought about what it was taking from us.
It wasn't just stealing our voices. It was taking the cadence, the intent behind the words. I still see Margus.
He's the same guy he always was.
But sometimes when he speaks, I hear something underneath it. And I think about what it might have collected in all of that dark.
The Hoh Rainforest doesn't give up its secrets.
it just absorbs them into the moss and the mud.
It takes what wanders in, and it learns. And it waits. If you ever find yourself out there, and the birds suddenly go quiet, don't wait to see what's coming. Because you really don't want to know what it's still doing with what it learned.